Hollywood sold a fantasy of elegance and effortless stardom. But what if some of its brightest actresses paid a price the studios never admitted? Behind velvet premieres and glowing marquees were quiet meetings and promises never written in contracts. Careers could rise overnight, or disappear just as fast. Tonight we're uncovering stories Hollywood preferred to keep hidden. Barbara Payton. By the late 1940s, Barbara Payton looked like exactly the kind of star Hollywood loved to create. Striking beauty, sharp screen presence, and the type of face studios believed could sell movie tickets overnight. But behind the cameras, her path through the industry was far less glamorous. Payton arrived in Los Angeles chasing the same dream thousands of young actresses carried: fame, film roles, and the promise of becoming Hollywood's next sensation. What she discovered instead was a system tightly controlled by producers, agents, and studio executives who decided which newcomers would rise and which would quietly disappear. In that environment, opportunities often appeared through informal channels: private dinners, social gatherings, and late-night meetings where powerful men discussed careers away from the public eye. These encounters were rarely documented, but inside Hollywood they were understood as part of the industry's unwritten rules. For a brief time, the strategy seemed to work. Payton secured roles in films such as Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, alongside James Cagney. Her photographs appeared in magazines, and studios began promoting her as a promising new face. But Hollywood loyalty could vanish quickly. As Payton's personal life became increasingly public, especially her highly reported relationships with actors Tom Neal and Franchot Tone, the industry that once supported her slowly withdrew. Roles faded, contracts disappeared, and the rising star image collapsed. Within a decade, the actress once advertised as Hollywood's next sensation had been largely forgotten, leaving behind one of the era's most cautionary stories. Veronica Lake. When Veronica Lake appeared on screen in the early 1940s, audiences were instantly captivated. Her signature peekaboo hairstyle, calm voice, and mysterious presence turned her into one of Paramount Pictures' most recognizable stars. Yet her rise inside Hollywood was more complicated than the public ever saw. Born Constance Ockelman, Hedy Lake entered the industry at a time when studios exercised nearly complete control over young actors. Contracts dictated everything, from haircuts and wardrobe to publicity appearances and personal behavior. Careers were often shaped behind closed doors by producers who determined which actresses would become stars. Lake's early opportunities reportedly came after studio executives recognized how distinctive her appearance was. But attention from powerful figures in Hollywood rarely came without expectations. Social gatherings became an important part of the industry's networking culture. Actresses were encouraged to attend private parties and industry dinners where producers and financiers mingled. These events often functioned as unofficial auditions where careers could quietly begin. For Lake, those connections initially worked. Films like Sullivan's Travels and This Gun for Hire turned her into a major box office attraction almost overnight. But fame inside the studio system could be fragile. As stories about her being difficult on set circulated through industry circles, the same figures who once promoted her began distancing themselves. Directors complained, producers hesitated, and roles slowly disappeared. By the late 1940s, Veronica Lake's Hollywood momentum had faded. Her image remained one of classic cinema's most recognizable, but her career revealed how quickly the studio system could elevate a star and just as quickly abandon them. Jane Mansfield. In the 1950s, Jane Mansfield understood something many Hollywood actresses eventually learned. Fame was not always built on talent alone. It was built on attention. Mansfield arrived in Los Angeles determined to break through an industry already crowded with ambitious performers. At the time, Marilyn Monroe dominated Hollywood's blonde bombshell image, and studios believed there was room for only one major star of that type. Mansfield chose a different approach. Rather than waiting for traditional roles, she turned publicity itself into a strategy. Studio insiders arranged appearances designed to generate headlines. Mansfield attended high-profile parties and industry events where producers, agents, and executives gathered. These gatherings were more than social occasions. They were places where careers were discussed, contracts negotiated, and new faces evaluated. Photographers were often alerted ahead of time, ensuring Mansfield's appearances created sensational headlines. See carefully staged wardrobe mishaps, and dramatic entrances guaranteed her photographs appeared in newspapers across the country. The strategy worked. 20th Century Fox soon signed Mansfield and began marketing her as a glamorous rival to Monroe. Films like The Girl Can't Help It made her instantly recognizable. Yet the publicity machine that created her fame also trapped her inside a carefully controlled image. Studio executives dictated her roles and public persona, while the press followed every detail of her personal life. Mansfield later expressed frustration that Hollywood often valued spectacle more than her acting ability. Behind the glamorous headlines was a career built on constant visibility and constant scrutiny. Kim Novak. When Kim Novak first arrived at Columbia Pictures in the early 1950s, she was not originally expected to become one of the studio's biggest stars. But powerful executives believed she could be reshaped into exactly the kind of actress audiences wanted. The transformation began immediately. Novak's real name, Marilyn Pauline Novak, was shortened. Her appearance was redesigned, publicity photographs carefully staged, and even her personal history adjusted to present a more glamorous image. Inside the studio system, actors were often treated like investments, images that could be molded, marketed, and controlled. Behind the scenes, Novak soon realized that the transformation came with strict expectations. Columbia's studio head Harry Cohn was known for closely supervising his contract players. Personal relationships, career decisions, and public appearances were monitored carefully. Social gatherings with producers and financiers were common, and these events quietly influenced casting decisions across the industry. Despite that pressure, Novak's talent quickly stood out. Films like Picnic and Vertigo, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, made her one of Hollywood's most compelling screen presences. But Novak eventually grew frustrated with the system controlling her identity. In a rare move for the time, she began rejecting certain studio demands and slowly stepped away from the rigid Hollywood structure. Her career became an unusual example of resistance inside a system designed to manufacture stars. Dorothy Dandridge. For Dorothy Dandridge, Hollywood was not simply difficult. It was nearly impossible. During the 1940s and 50s, the American film industry operated under an unwritten racial barrier that severely limited opportunities for black performers. Leading roles were extremely rare, and many scripts reduced black characters to stereotypes. Dandridge refused to accept those limits. She began her career performing in nightclubs and touring musical revues, gradually attracting attention from producers who recognized her remarkable presence. Elegant, charismatic, and confident on screen, she possessed the qualities of a true Hollywood star. But entering the studio system meant navigating an industry controlled almost entirely by white executives. Dandridge often attended private industry gatherings where producers and investors evaluated potential performers. These meetings were rarely formal auditions. Instead, they functioned as quiet negotiations about which artists might be allowed opportunities within a segregated entertainment system. Her breakthrough arrived with the 1954 film Carmen Jones. The performance made her the first black woman nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress, an extraordinary milestone in Hollywood history. For a brief moment, it appeared barriers were finally beginning to break. But progress was painfully slow. Major roles remained scarce, and studios continued offering limited parts that failed to match her talent. Financial difficulties and career setbacks followed in the years that came after. Dorothy Dandridge's journey exposed a difficult truth about Golden Age Hollywood. Even extraordinary talent could struggle against the industry's hidden rules. Gloria Graham. In the late 1940s, Gloria Graham became one of Hollywood's most intriguing screen presences. Her performances carried a mixture of vulnerability and danger that perfectly suited the growing popularity of film noir. But Graham's path into the spotlight moved through a studio system where influence often mattered as much as talent. Like many actresses arriving in Los Angeles during that era, Graham quickly discovered that auditions were not always held on sound stages. Some took place at private homes, hotel lounges, or exclusive restaurants where influential producers quietly evaluated new talent. Studio executives controlled contracts with enormous authority. They could elevate a performer overnight, or end a career just as quickly. For young actresses navigating this environment, professional survival often depended on maintaining relationships with the industry's most powerful figures. Graham's career advanced steadily through supporting roles that showcased her smoky voice and subtle intensity. By the early 1950s, she had become one of the defining actresses of Hollywood noir. Films like In a Lonely Place and The Big Heat strengthened her reputation as a complex and captivating performer. Her talent eventually earned her an Academy Award for The Bad and the Beautiful, a film that ironically depicted the ruthless manipulation of actors by powerful Hollywood producers. But Graham's off-screen life soon attracted the kind of attention studios feared. Personal relationships, controversial marriages, and persistent rumors circulating through industry circles gradually overshadowed her work. For a time, Gloria Graham seemed to have everything Hollywood promised. Then the same industry that helped create her image slowly turned away. Hedy Lamarr. When Hedy Lamarr arrived in Hollywood in the late 1930s, studio publicity departments introduced her with a dramatic description: the most beautiful woman in the world. But long before she reached California, Lamarr had already experienced the realities of power and control. Born Hedwig Kiesler in Austria, she gained international attention after appearing in the controversial European film Ecstasy in 1933. The film created a scandal that followed her for years. Soon after, she married wealthy arms manufacturer Friedrich Mandl. Lamarr later described that marriage as deeply controlling. Mandl reportedly monitored her movements, restricted her independence, and even attempted to buy up copies of Ecstasy to erase her public image. Hollywood seemed like an escape. Yet the American studio system operated with its own form of control. When Louis B. Mayer signed her to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in 1938, her identity was carefully redesigned. Her name was simplified, publicity appearances were scripted, and her image was crafted to maintain an aura of mysterious glamour. Executives directed her career decisions, publicity relationships, and social appearances. Actresses were often expected to attend exclusive gatherings where Hollywood's most powerful figures socialized. Lamarr became a major star in films such as Algiers and Samson and Delilah. Yet despite her intelligence and creativity, she later helped develop an early radio guidance technology used in wartime communications. Hollywood rarely allowed her to be recognized for anything beyond her beauty. In a system built on image, even brilliance could remain hidden. Jean Harlow. Before Marilyn Monroe ever stepped in front of a camera, Jean Harlow had already defined Hollywood's original blonde bombshell. In the early 1930s, her platinum hair and daring screen presence made her one of MGM's most valuable stars. But Harlow's sudden rise also reflected how the studio system could transform an unknown actress into a global celebrity almost overnight. Born Harlan Carpenter, she entered Hollywood with strong personal connections. Her mother, known socially as Mama Jean, was deeply involved in managing her daughter's career and often negotiated directly with producers and studio executives. Inside MGM, Harlow quickly attracted attention from some of the most powerful figures in the industry. At the time, studio contracts gave executives enormous authority over young actors. They controlled salaries, publicity, schedules, and sometimes even personal relationships. Rising actresses were often encouraged to maintain friendly relationships with influential producers who decided casting choices. Harlow's charisma made her impossible to ignore. Films like Red-Headed Woman and Dinner at 8 turned her into a cultural sensation. Audiences were fascinated by her bold personality and glamorous image, which MGM promoted relentlessly. Yet her personal life was far more complicated than the carefree character she played. Whispers about relationships, studio politics, and intense pressure followed her career almost constantly. Fame arrived quickly, and so did the expectations that came with it. Tragically, Harlow's life ended in 1937 at just 26 years old, leaving behind a legend that still defines the era. Her story remains one of the earliest examples of how Hollywood could build a star with incredible speed, while quietly consuming the person behind the image. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford's rise from poverty to Hollywood royalty looked like the perfect American dream. But the road she traveled inside the studio system was far more complicated than the publicity story suggested. Born Lucille LeSueur, de Crawford arrived in Hollywood during the Roaring '20s with almost nothing. She worked as a dancer in traveling revues before gradually finding small roles in silent films. At the time, MGM was searching for new faces to promote as modern screen icons. Crawford had ambition, and she knew exactly how to use it. Hollywood insiders often described her as one of the hardest working actresses in the industry. She attended studio events, cultivated relationships with powerful producers, and understood that visibility was essential to survival in a fiercely competitive environment. The studio system rewarded that determination. By the early 1930s, Crawford had become one of MGM's biggest stars, appearing in films like Grand Hotel and Mildred Pierce. Her image evolved from carefree flapper to strong dramatic actress capable of carrying major productions. But behind the scenes, her career also reflected the quiet negotiations that defined Hollywood power. Executives monitored actors closely. Loyalty to the studio was expected, and careers could be shaped or halted based on relationships with those in charge. Crawford navigated those politics better than most. She survived decades in an industry where many actresses vanished after only a few films. Yet even her success came with a cost: relentless pressure to maintain the image that studios had created. In Hollywood's golden era, ambition could make someone a legend, but it also meant playing a game where the rules were rarely spoken aloud. Rita Hayworth. To audiences in the 1940s, Rita Hayworth represented pure Hollywood glamour. Her performance in Gilda made her one of the most photographed women in the world. Posters of her image were carried by soldiers across Europe during World War II, turning her into an international symbol of beauty. But the woman behind that image was living inside a carefully engineered studio creation. Hayworth was born Margarita Cancino, the daughter of Spanish dancer Eduardo Cancino. When Columbia Pictures signed her, studio executives believed her appearance needed to change before she could become a leading star. Her hairline was altered through painful electrolysis treatments. Her dark hair was dyed bright red. Even her name was replaced with the more marketable Rita Hayworth. The transformation worked. Under the control of Columbia's powerful studio head Harry Cohn, Mae West became the studio's most valuable star. But Cohn's reputation for strict authority and intense personal interest in his actresses was widely known throughout Hollywood. Actors and crew members often described him as fiercely possessive of his contract players. Careers could rise or collapse depending on his favor. Hayworth's professional success came alongside constant studio oversight of her personal life, relationships, and public image. Despite the glamour projected on screen, she later admitted something deeply revealing about fame in Hollywood. "Men fell in love with Gilda," she once said, referring to her famous role. "But they woke up with me." Behind the fantasy Hollywood sold to the world was a far more complicated reality. Mae West. Before Hollywood learned how to control scandal, Mae West was already using it as a weapon. When she arrived in the early 1930s, the film industry was still experimenting with what audiences would tolerate. West understood something producers didn't. Controversy sold tickets. But her rise also revealed the complicated negotiations actresses faced inside a male-dominated industry. West had already built a reputation on Broadway, writing provocative plays filled with double meanings and unapologetic female characters. When she entered Hollywood, studios saw both opportunity and danger. Unlike many actresses of the era, West refused to pretend innocence. She openly acknowledged the power dynamics inside the industry and famously insisted on writing many of her own scripts to avoid being controlled by producers. Films like She Done Him Wrong and I'm No Angel became enormous box office successes during the Great Depression. Her characters were bold, confident, and fully aware of their influence over men. But that independence made Hollywood executives nervous. Religious groups and censorship boards began attacking West's films, accusing them of promoting immoral behavior. Studio executives quietly tried to soften her image to avoid further controversy. West resisted. Her career became one of the earliest examples of an actress attempting to control her own narrative in a system designed to control her. In an industry built on silent compromises, Mae West chose something far more dangerous. She refused to whisper. Shirley Temple. During the 1930s, Shirley Temple was the most famous child star in the world. Her curly hair, bright smile, and cheerful songs helped lift American audiences through the darkest years of the Great Depression. But decades later, Temple would reveal a story that exposed a disturbing reality behind Hollywood's cheerful image. In her autobiography, Temple described an encounter that occurred when she was a teenager, meeting with a studio executive about potential roles. The meeting quickly turned uncomfortable. According to Temple, the executive behaved inappropriately and attempted to exploit the power imbalance between a young actress and a powerful studio figure. Temple reacted immediately. She laughed in his face and left the office. The moment ended quickly, but the lesson stayed with her. Temple later explained that many young performers entering Hollywood faced situations where powerful figures believed their influence could be used for personal advantage. The studio system rarely discussed these incidents publicly. Careers depended on silence, and many actors feared speaking openly about the industry's hidden culture. Temple was fortunate. By the time the incident occurred, she was already one of the most famous names in the country. That fame gave her the ability to walk away from the situation. But her story revealed something deeply unsettling. Even Hollywood's most beloved child star was not completely protected from the system operating behind studio doors. Judy Garland. Few performers represented the magic of classic Hollywood more than Judy Garland. Nay, her role as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz created one of the most beloved characters in film history. But behind the scenes, Garland's life inside the MGM studio system was filled with pressure few audiences ever imagined. Garland signed with MGM as a teenager and immediately entered one of the most powerful entertainment machines in the world. The studio controlled everything: her schedule, diet, public image, and even her sleep. Executives believed stars needed to remain energetic and thin to maintain their appeal. Garland was reportedly given stimulant pills to stay awake during long filming schedules and other medications to help her rest afterward. The cycle became exhausting. At the same time, Garland later described uncomfortable experiences involving powerful studio figures who treated young performers as if they were part of the studio's property. Inside MGM, actors often had little power to refuse demands. Contracts tied them to studios for years, and challenging executives could mean losing roles entirely. Despite the intense pressure, Garland delivered extraordinary performances in films like Meet Me in St. Louis and Easter Parade. But the emotional and physical strain eventually caught up with her. Garland's story revealed the darker cost of Hollywood's dream factory, an industry capable of creating unforgettable stars while quietly exhausting the people behind them. Marilyn Monroe. No actress represents the myth of Hollywood glamour more than Marilyn Monroe. But behind the soft lighting, red carpets, and magazine covers was a young woman who entered the film industry with almost no protection from its most powerful figures. Born Norma Jean Mortensen, Monroe grew up in foster homes and unstable living situations. When she arrived in Hollywood in the late 1940s, she had little money and no influential connections. The studio system quickly noticed her beauty, but early opportunities were limited, and Monroe later acknowledged the difficult reality many aspiring actresses faced. Powerful men in the industry controlled casting decisions, contracts, and publicity. In interviews years later, Monroe admitted that young actresses sometimes encountered situations where favors were expected in exchange for opportunities. Hollywood rarely discussed those arrangements openly. Despite the obstacles, Monroe's talent and determination eventually made her one of the biggest stars in the world. Films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and Some Like It Hot turned her into an international icon. Yet Monroe never forgot the vulnerability she experienced when she first arrived in Los Angeles. Her story became one of the most famous examples of how ambition, desperation, and power intersected during Hollywood's golden age. The world saw the blonde legend, but the road to becoming Marilyn Monroe was far more complicated. Lana Turner. The story sounded like pure Hollywood fantasy. In 1936, a teenage girl was reportedly discovered sitting at a soda fountain in Los Angeles. Within months, she was signing studio contracts and appearing in major films. That girl was Lana Turner. The famous soda shop discovery story became one of Hollywood's most repeated legends. But behind the publicity narrative was a far more complicated reality about how the studio system created stars. Turner entered the industry at just 16 years old. MGM quickly recognized her screen appeal and began shaping her image into one of Hollywood's most glamorous leading ladies. Like many young actresses under contract, Turner's schedule, wardrobe, public appearances, and personal relationships were closely supervised by studio executives. The studio system believed stars were investments that needed careful management. Turner soon became one of MGM's most popular actresses, appearing in films such as The Postman Always Rings Twice and Payton Place. But fame also brought relentless scrutiny. Her personal life, romances, marriages, and dramatic headlines often became tabloid material that followed her career for decades. The image Hollywood sold was simple: a beautiful girl discovered by chance who became a legend. But like so many stars of the golden age, Lana Turner's success was shaped inside a system where power, ambition, and image were carefully negotiated behind closed doors. And many of those negotiations were never meant to be seen by the public. Hollywood's golden age promised glamour, but behind the spotlight lived a far more complicated truth. These actresses chased the same dream millions admired from theater seats. Yet the path to stardom often came with silent expectations and hidden costs. The question remains, how many other stories never reached the headlines? Because in Hollywood, the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows.